Hey everybody, I'm Jason, and this is Jay's Project Garage. So it's funny, it's a little bit before 7. It's raining, Saturday morning. Had all kinds of stuff I wanted to do today, and I guess it's going to rain. But it's funny. You know, when I was a kid, my grandpa had one of those magnifying glasses with the lights on it, and it was on a big arm, and he always sat by his chair. And I used to give him crap about it all the time. It was funny. Do you know what these are? Karma. I never should have made fun of them. My eyes would probably be perfect right now. So I'm just drinking my cup of coffee. My kids got me that. It's funny. If you're a dad, you get it. But today, or this morning anyway, we're going to work on this this 5 liter, seized up 5 liter a little bit more. And we're going to talk about the cylinder heads. But before I go over to the bench, put you guys on your tripod, start tearing this thing down some more, I want to talk about the heads. So E6SE, and we've talked about in other videos on how to decode Ford part numbers, and that's the E6SE is the prefix. So E is the decade, 80, 6 would be the year of the decade, so 86, and S is actually Thunderbird. And then the last one, E, is engine. So an 86 Thunderbird engine is what this stuff was originally designed for, sorta. But in the last video, I talked about how those heads were 1 year only in the HO, but they actually carried on till 90, 91, somewhere in there. And they found their way onto like 86 trucks, and they found their way. They were really just used on the non-HO engines. So 4 years or so. They're not bad. They're just, for the kind of stuff that we do, if you really want some performance, they're not good. And I've got 4 or 5 sets of those things laying around. They were known for making great torque, but at about 4,500, maybe 5,000, they were completely out of breath. The ports are smaller than the E7TE. The chamber is smaller. The valves are smaller. The valves are really shrouded because of the combustion chamber. The pistons are actually down in the hole just a little bit so they get the compression ratio and the overall chamber size that they wanted with the head gasket and everything. But they worked for their intended purpose, but they were really just a stopgap. I don't know if, I wouldn't say that they were rushed into production or anything, or that they were rushed through engineering. But the 80s were a different time. The 70s were a different time, the 90s, the 2000s. So I'll judge these things for what they are, which I really shouldn't. I mean, they did their job. But they were really just a stopgap for EPA regulations that were coming. So I'm assuming there were some new regulations in 86 for NOx emissions and that kind of stuff. So Ford had to do something, and this was their answer. And it worked. I mean, they're still great engines. If you wanted to build one of these things with these heads and put it in anything, just as a daily driver, they'd be great. They would make great low-end torque, and as long as you're not revving the crap out of them. But like I said, I've got multiple sets of these things, and I'm never going to use them for anything. I need to work on not hoarding. But if you wanted to build an engine for towing in a truck or something like that, and you knew you were never going to rev it over 4,500, and you just wanted to make the best torque that you could, maybe these wouldn't be that bad of a choice. But I'll tell you a story about an engine that I did build for torque, and it wasn't for a truck, it was for a car, because I had a theory. And it worked out. I mean, the thing was wicked. But I'll talk about that while we're doing the teardown. Okay, so we talked about these heads just a little bit, and I had mentioned that the valves are sunk way up in the chamber. Sorry about the lighting, guys. I promise I'm going to start doing better. One thing to keep in mind on these heads is these valves are shorter than what you'd find on an E7TE. And the valve seats are further up in the head. That was the comment that I made. Look how far the valves are sunk up into the chamber. This chamber design was intended to promote swirl. And when you have swirl, which aka turbulence, it helps keep the fuel in suspension. And you can see where the fire ring originally was. Can you guys see that? You can see where the fire ring originally was on the head gasket. And you can see how much area they have for quench. Now I'm going to do a whole video on cylinder heads and my theories on quench. But basically, the quench area also helps to promote turbulence, which helps keep the fuel in suspension, or helps atomize it even more. And the finer the fuel is atomized, the better it burns. That's part of the theory behind these things for emissions. But I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this or not. After I made the video last week, I went through and took some PB Blaster and put it in each cylinder, hoping to kind of help break the pistons free. And I took a block of wood and a hammer and lightly gave each piston a whack. And that'll jar it to hopefully help break the rings free. Not because I want to rotate this thing and want to fire it up the way it is, but I'm going to have to take these pistons out, and I don't want to have to wail on them. I mean, not like it really matters. I'm not going to reuse these pistons anyway. But most of these cylinders still have PB Blaster sitting in them, except for a couple. This one is dry. This one is also dry, and that tells me that these rings are completely stuck and the PB Blaster worked its way past them. Or is it just that the ring gaps are lined up in the right spot? And we're going to talk about ring gap stuff more when I do the Tecumseh video. But I think today what we're going to do is we're going to drain the oil out of this thing, and we're going to watch it when it comes out. There was several of these cylinders that had water in them, standing water when we took the heads off. But there's some of them that there was water in, that you could tell that there had been water in, but the water was gone. So it probably wound up down in the crankcase. What did it do to the crank and the rods and the oil pan? Because you know, oil floats, so the water has been sitting on the oil pan. Did it rust out the inside of the pan? But whenever you see those revival videos and the guys get one of these things broken free, there had been water in one of the cylinders or multiple of the cylinders. And yes, they got it broken free, but what else did the water do? And that's what I want to find out today. Okay, I just pulled the plug and I had just a little bitty tiny trickle of water for a split second, and it's just this black sludgy boogery goo. But I'm going to let this thing sit here and dry for just a second. I'm also going to pull the plug on the front sump and see what it looks like. Handy dandy metric adjustable. Surprised it's working on this engine since most of this stuff's standard. Ready? There's water and more of that black goo. It's pretty gross. Oh, why is it that always happens? You drop a tool or a drain plug or something down in the drain pan. There's more. It's pretty gross. I was originally going to flip this thing over to pull the pan off, but I may just pull it off with it sitting like this. It's a lot more difficult, but any of that goo that's in the pan will stay in the pan if I pull it off this way versus it all falling onto the rotating assembly. So, all the tools I use here at home are DeWalt, and the stuff that I use at work is Milwaukee. So, I'm not totally brand loyal when it comes to this. But I've had DeWalt stuff since the 18 volt came out decades ago. But my 18 volt batteries finally took a crap. So I went and bought the adapter to use the 20 volt batteries, and these things last a lot longer. One thing I have found though, that if I leave a battery on a tool and I let it sit from like last weekend to now, the battery's dead. I don't know why. And this adapter is a real pain in the ass to get off of the tool. I mean, you have to be Goldberg to be able to push in on these things and pull it off, and you only get one adapter. I mean, I could probably buy more, but I got a whole bunch of DeWalt tools. It'd be expensive to buy all of these things. Just something to keep in mind. The adapters are great. Gives life back to your old crappy tools. But make sure you pull the batteries off if you're going to let it sit for a little while. But the kit that I bought comes with 2 batteries and the adapter. If you go to Lowe's or something like that and buy them, they're like $200. But I found them on Amazon for $155, I think. And as far as I can tell, it's not a knockoff. It's actually genuine DeWalt stuff. I don't know. I mean, the batteries hold up really well. And it's got a battery indicator on the back, which is cool. That's something the 18 volt stuff never had. Okay, a couple more bolts and we'll have this thing off of here. I'll show you a really cool feature on these pans that I wish they had always used, and I'll explain why. All right, moment of truth. Ooh, sludgy. And it's got a really special smell. Not bad though. But we'll get this thing flipped over and we'll get a good look at it, and I'll show you what I was talking about in the oil pan. It's not horrible in here. It's not all rusty, or it's got a lot of that black goop you can see in the oil pan. I've definitely seen worse. This is a prime example of what I was talking about before, about taking engines apart and Ford using the same stuff for a long time. D1. That's a 1971 connecting rod, or 1971 design connecting rod. And I've taken these things apart before and found C8 connecting rods in them. But this is what I was talking about on the oil pan. You see how thick that is? Basically this goes on like that, and it sandwiches the oil pan when you run the bolts in. I'm sure you've all taken oil pans off, transmission pans, that kind of stuff. Everywhere there's a bolt, it like pooches the metal. You can actually cut the gasket. It's just from being over torqued. These will prevent that. It helps more evenly distribute the load and helps prevent leaks. This is some more proof of my theory that somebody's been into this thing a lot before. It's got a double roller timing chain in it. RTV gooped everywhere. There's RTV gooped on the front timing chain cover. So somebody's been in here before, either just doing some maintenance. Well, I don't know. We'll know when we start taking the rod and main caps off, see what the bearings are. But I know this thing's never been bored, because if it had, there'd be a stamp on top of the piston showing the oversize. Okay, so now we get the thing flipped over, and this is the code that I originally looked at, which is E7TE. So it's an E7TE block, so we know it's not an 86HO. And here's the date code. And you'll think, well, M would be the 13th month, and there's no such thing. You'd be right, except that Ford never used an I, because it can be confused with a 1. So it's an 89, December 3rd. So December 3rd, 1989. So it's an 89 non-HO. Probably have a Thunderbird or a Cougar or something like that. But it doesn't really matter. The block itself, the crank, the connecting rods are the exact same as an HO. The only difference would be the pistons and the non-HO firing order camshaft. So it's a non-HO. It's not a big deal. I'm pretty sure this thing would clean up just fine at 30 over. And I have a set of brand new, forged, basically HO replacement pistons, 30 over. And I have several HO factory roller cams. So it'd be really easy with just the cost of machine work to build a brand new HO 5-liter. And I have several sets of E7 TE heads. So I could build a brand new HO. Well, brand new HO. It's not a big deal. And it'll be relatively inexpensive. I could probably do the whole thing, machine work and all, for $600-700. And I've only got $100 in the engine, so for less than $1,000, I could have a basically rebuilt, brand new forged piston HO. And you'll think, well, you know, you got the cost of the pistons. Well, here's the story behind that. So a buddy of mine calls me up and said, hey, I bought a whole bunch of stuff from my Model A. It's the guy I bought the Model A from. Come over and look at it. I want to see what you think. So I go over and look at it. And he had a roller short block sitting there. So the guy built this thing, he was going to put in his Mustang, let it sit around forever, got a little bit of water in it. Very, very minor. Just a little bit of surface rust here and there. The block and everything would be perfectly fine, but it had a brand new set of forged pistons in it. It didn't have a camshaft or lifters or any of that kind of stuff. It was just basically a short block, sans any camshaft stuff, or roller or timing chain or any of that. So I went ahead and pulled it apart to make sure that the bearings and everything looked good. The crank was 1010. Everything looked really good. It'll all clean up. So I've got that set of pistons out of that thing that I could use in this, and that's the block that I'm going to use to build the Roller 289, and we'll go through all of that stuff. It should be cool. So what should we do with this thing? Should we just basically build an HO 50 and sell it? Should we build a 50 HO and give it away on the channel? Should we build a 50 HO and put it in the 91 and just drive the damn thing and while we're waiting to finish collecting all the parts for the 351? I mean, I still have all the injection and everything. It would be pretty straightforward to put the car back together on the cheap. The only downside is the only headers I have are shorties. I mean, I've got equal and non-equal length, and I've got an H-pipe, but I mean, that'd be a cheap way to put the car back together. Let me know what you guys think. But for now, I'm going to pull a rod cap and a main cap, and we're going to see what the bearings look like, and we're going to talk about what to look for. Okay, so off camera, I'm going to go ahead and take the oil pump pickup tube off and the oil pump just to get it out of the way. And then we're going to pull one of the main caps, and I'll show you which one I always pull to show where the worst damage is going to be, and also the rod cap. Okay, so I got everything loose. I'm going to go ahead and pull this oil pump out, and we're going to pay attention to the drive. Notice how the drive shaft didn't go anywhere? See that? That will prevent this from coming out when you pull your distributor, and the shape of that helps center it in the hole that's down in the block that it goes through. So it makes it easier to put the distributor in. This thing won't fall to one side of the hole or the other. So when you're putting one of these things together, try to have something like that in there. Even if you're using a good ARP or an aftermarket, any kind of aftermarket drive shaft, which any 5-liter benefit from having a bigger shaft, because you can see how small that thing is. These things have a tendency to twist, especially if you're using a high volume pump, thicker oil. Okay, now the knee-jerk reaction would be, well, Ford should have just put a better shaft in there. My theory is that it was kind of a safety measure. So on small block Chevys, if the oil pump locks up, it's going to shear the roll pan off that holds the gear to the distributor shaft. On Fords, it's just going to twist the shaft up. And it's going to keep you from tearing up the distributor, which is a more expensive part than just putting a shaft in it. Small block Chevys, tearing up a distributor or tearing up a roll pan is a whole lot cheaper than tearing up the whole distributor. That's just my theory. Okay, so what I normally do is if I just want to pull a couple rod and main caps off to see what the health of the engine is, I'll take the one at the rear and I'll take the one at the front. And if it's a clutch car, I'm going to check the thrust, which is actually the center main bearing on a Ford. And the reason I check the thrust is because every time you push on that clutch pedal, it's pushing the crankshaft forward and it can eat the thrust bearing. And almost every single clutch car that I've ever seen that had a bunch of miles on it, that thrust bearing was pretty toast. So we're going to pull the front main cap and the rear main cap, and we're going to pull one of the front rod bearing caps, and I don't know if I can get to the rear or not, but this one's going to be really easy. I may pull this one. To save you guys the noise, I went ahead and busted the bolts loose. And when you're pulling a cap, I don't normally hit the cap, I hit the bolt. I'm not going to reuse these bolts anyway, most likely. But on the crankshaft, because of the forces of combustion, the bottom half of the bearing is going to be the one with the most wear. Not only do you have the weight of the crankshaft resting on the bearings, but like I said, every time there's a combustion event, it's pushing down on the main bearing. Not the worst I've ever seen. Pretty even wear. They're really not bad. You can tell there's been a little bit of stuff that's gone through the engine. There's just little grooves. But I call it flecking, where it's kind of splotchy looking. This one doesn't have that. So I would say that there probably weren't really a whole lot of contaminants or anything in the oil over the course of time. But I'm going to get this bearing out and we're going to see what the date code is on it, if it has one or if it's even a Ford bearing. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see it because it's really faint. Ford logo. No oversize written on it. The funniest thing about this bearing is a C5 part number. That's 1965. Still being used in 1990. Ford definitely got their use out of different designs on parts. Okay, let's get that rear one off of there. Remember to hit the bolt. Eesh. Somebody went really crazy with the RTV. That one looks pretty good too. You'll see it a lot. Guys will really freak out when they see a difference in the wear on the sides of the bearings. That's actually really common. When these bearings get torqued, they'll crush just a little bit right there. So you're almost always going to have just a little more wear on the parting line than you will anywhere else. It's because normally the clearances are just a little bit tighter there than they are anywhere else on the bearing. Okay, so I got the nuts loose on one of the rods, and with them run up just a little bit, I'll give it a tap on the nut itself. That piston moved. And you can go ahead and take the nuts off and the cap. Oof. On rods, you're actually going to want to look more at the upper half than the lower, because that's the one that takes more load. But these look pretty similar to the main bearings. And you'll see kind of the same thing right on that parting line. There's more wear. Same thing there. The clearance are just a little bit tighter at the parting line. Not a ton, but enough. And these bearings are pretty tight in the cap. We'll see how tight it is in the other end. Ooh, that's tight. Let me go grab something to get that bearing out of there. Okay, here's the top half of the bearing. And you'll see that there's a lot more wear on this top half, and you can see where some garbage has gone through. And the coloring has kind of told me that this thing's gotten just a little bit warm. Can you guys see it? A little bit rainbowed right there. Or maybe it was starting to stir for oil. Same deal on the bearings. More wear on the parting lines. But these are all Ford bearings. They're all standard. So we've got an all standard 5-liter here. These bearings really aren't bad. And these things fit really tight in the rod itself and in the cap. So that tells me that this thing probably never really detonated, because if it had, it would have beat the crap out of the bearings and they would have just fallen out. So that's pretty good. So we've got an all standard Ford non-HO 5-liter. Looks like the block should clean up fine at 30 over. It has some rust on it, but it's not real scaly, flaky, nasty stuff. Once we get the pistons out, we'll run a bore gauge down in it and we'll find out for sure. Bearings all look pretty good. Crank will probably clean up fine at 1010, may even clean up at standard. We'd have to mic it. It's definitely worth $100. We got a really, really good core. So the engine that I built years ago for a buddy of mine's dad, he had a '65 Mustang Coupe. I actually did a whole bunch of work on the car for him. Put a Mustang 2 front clip and stuff in it, all new floors. Put a Curry 9-inch rear end in it, an Art Car AOD with I think it was a 2500 stall. But for engine, originally I was going to build him kind of a Hypo 289, kind of a hydraulic cam version of a Hypo 289, lower maintenance. But it would have been, you know, in the neighborhood of 300 horsepower. Then he got the bright idea, because I was building a 351 for one of my Mach 1s. He's like, I think we should put a 351 Windsor in this thing. No problem. We get the Mustang 2 front suspension and everything under it, so we got miles of room, not a problem. He said, I just want to drive this thing on the street and maybe autocross it a little bit. Okay, that makes it easy. So I went and got a 351 out of a, I think it was a mid-80s van. It was a one-piece rear main seal. Took it, bought a set of forged pistons for it with the big goofy dish. Basically a replacement truck piston that I forged. Used the truck football connecting rods, stock crank. Put a set of performer heads on it that I port matched to a performer RPM intake. Did a little bit of minor bowl work on the heads, nothing major. I didn't want to open up the ports huge or anything like that. I just cleaned them up. For the camshaft, everybody said I was crazy. But back in the day, when we didn't have 1,000,001 different camshafts to pick from, and the roller stuff was pretty crazy expensive, we would just pick whatever camshaft had the specs that we liked, regardless of what the application said it was for. A buddy of mine had a camshaft that was actually designed for oval track in his Camaro. The thing ran awesome. I think he was running in the low 11s with it, and it wasn't anything special. It was a 355. Another buddy of mine put a camshaft that was designed for a jet boat in his 396 Chevelle, and the thing ran awesome, just because he liked the lift and duration numbers and the overlap and all that kind of stuff. So for the 351, I picked a Comp Cam's Extreme Energy 4x4 camshaft. That's for a truck. The camshaft doesn't know what it's in. It has no idea. But it was made to make a lot of mid-range, low-end and mid-range torque, which is what I was looking for because it's a street car. I wanted it to be a fun street car. So I put this whole thing together, and I used a 600 CFM carburetor, which is probably a little bit on the low side, but I knew he was never really going to be revving the crap out of it. What we wound up with was over 350 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque. That's right, 480 pound-feet of torque. That's 1.34 pound-feet per cubic inch, which is pretty decent for something I just threw together with catalog parts. And the car was an animal, an absolute animal, from stoplight to stoplight. And he actually took it to Putnam Road Course. It's not too far from here in Indiana. And the thing was mean out of the corners. I mean, he was walking on 350Zs and Porsches and all kinds of stuff, just walking away from him coming off the corners. We only did that a few times. The majority of the time the car was spent driving it. He was an older gentleman, never really had anything fast, and he wound up selling the car because when he stood in it, it affected his vision. I don't know. I've never had that problem, but that was his claim, and he sold the car, which is a shame because that engine was pretty awesome. I wouldn't mind having it back. But it just goes to show you that if you pick the right parts for the intended purpose, you can get some pretty outstanding results. And it wasn't anything trick. It was all off-the-shelf stuff. I just paid really close attention during assembly, picked the right pieces for what I was trying to do, and it was stellar. That's probably it. I'm not going to take this thing the rest of the way apart until we're actually ready to do something with it, so make sure that you guys leave some comments and let me know. You just want to build a basically stock 50HO and put it in the 91 just so we can drive it, experiment with it a little bit. Should have just kind of put it on the back burner and build another 50HO and give it away on the channel. Obviously, we're going to need a lot more subscribers than we have now, and I'm going to need a little more interaction with you guys long before anything like that will happen. But I'm all about paying it forward. If any of you guys need anything, I'll always try to be there. The same way I am for all my buddies, my neighbors, and everything else. Now, Frank, you asked me for my contact info, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to give that out. It took me a long time to even admit where I lived in Indiana. I don't like talking on the phone. I don't ever check my emails. But you need some tuning help on your 351, and I'm all about trying to help you out. I can at least point you in the right directions. So if you're having carburetor tuning problems, check out Thunderhead 289. He's got some great videos. I couldn't do any better job than he does explaining carburetors and how to set them up and tune them and everything else. And he's also really good about distributors and showing you how to set up advanced and all that kind of crap. Without knowing everything there is to know about your combo, you kind of gave me the high points, but I would have to literally know, I would have to have it here to truly help you. But if you can post in the comments what some of your symptoms are, let me know what your compression ratio is, give me the cam specs, that kind of stuff. Maybe I can help point you in the right direction, but definitely check out Thunderhead 289's videos. He's a younger guy, but he has a very firm grasp on how to tune carburetors and ignition timing. So check him out. It might help you out quite a bit. But for now, you guys get out in the shop and work on your projects. You have a great day, and I will see you. I might make another video this weekend, but if not, I'll see you next weekend.